An idyllic island with a long history of corruption.
I don't think we saw it as corruption. It was just a way of doing business, honestly, and that's part of the problem.
Through history, hurricanes, and COVID relief funds, we track Puerto Rico's troubled past and the task force in charge of change.
When America started a shutdown in the early days of COVID, Oklahoma took a different approach.
You reopened the state of Oklahoma, not without some harsh criticism.
We wanted to protect the health and lives of Oklahomans.
Today, with COVID confusion still a part of everyday decision-making for many Americans, a look at one state that has kept on a steady course.
And in the face of mounting regulations and taxes, some companies are making an escape.
We saw a very different business climate, very interested in our success. We didn't have that in Southern California.
A lot of red tape gone.
This week, we track the Silicon escapees to South Florida.
Welcome to Full Measure. I'm Sharyl Attkisson. It's been a point of controversy and contention for years. A place that's gotten some of the most U.S. taxpayer money in history for causes like hurricane relief and rebuilding its electric grid is also known as one of the most corrupt when it comes to how it spends all that cash. Today, we dig deep into Puerto Rico's unique history of corruption with the federal agents assigned to tackle it. This is an FBI SWAT team practicing hostage rescue strategies.
FBI, we have a warrant for your arrest and search warrant for the residents. Come out.
In the mountains above San Juan on the island of Puerto Rico. Puerto Rico isn't just known for its idyllic landscapes and disastrous hurricanes. It's infamous for its reputation as one of the most corrupt places on the planet.
It's the FBI. We have a warrant for your arrest.
FBI agents here are kept busy working cases where violence and crime frequently link to public officials and political figures. One needn't look far to find recent Puerto Rican officials allegedly running cons involving huge amounts of your tax dollars, starting with the response to Hurricane Maria in 2017. The FBI arrested Puerto Rico's education secretary and 5 others in an alleged scheme to funnel millions in relief funds to certain contractors, which they deny. Also arrested, a Federal Emergency Management Agency official accused in a $1.8 billion bribery scheme. She denies it. A colleague pleaded guilty. Puerto Rico's last governor, Wanda Vasquez, was among officials accused of mismanaging earthquake relief supplies. Arrested in other recent corruption probes, a group of 8, including a Puerto Rico senator and 2 members of the Puerto Rico House of Representatives, all say they're innocent.
It doesn't have to be only hurricane relief money. It happens now with the pandemic relief money. Every time that the government wants to get money fast to people, it's like the processes are not set in place. We don't take the time to set those processes in place, and I think that creates opportunities.
Rafael Riviere says corruption is a well-known way of life in Puerto Rico.
We like to do more like real life scenarios.
I spoke with him shortly before he retired as FBI special agent in charge of the San Juan field office.
We're a colony from Spain, and then even when the United States came in, the way Puerto Rico was looked at was like, the position in the Caribbean, kind of like how it could help the United States. But it's not incorporated in the same way that a different state will be.
You were born in Puerto Rico?
Yes, I was. So growing up here, people, I don't think we saw it as corruption. It was just a way of doing business, honestly, and that's part of the problem, because it's kind of the culture. And when we look at the elected officials, well, they should know better. But when we look at somebody that might work in a particular department of the government, that they might facilitate a permit, I'm like, well, this is the way we do it. This person always brings me baskets of flowers or whatever, and of course I put him at the front of the line. Or he gives me this money on the side, so I speed up the process, but what's wrong with that? And we're trying to change that.
Puerto Rico has earned its notoriety with some of the FBI's biggest cases of public officials and police on the take. Felix Alvarado is a top FBI agent over public corruption.
We've had, in 2001, for example, we have Operation Honor Perdido. It's called Lost Honor in Spanish.
Operation Lost Honor resulted in the arrest of dozens of police. At trial, jurors were shown video of a Puerto Rico police evidence technician advising an undercover agent to murder a deadbeat dealer.
Then we had Operation Dark Justice, where we had a group of police officers, about 11 police officers, 6 former police officers that were arrested for kidnapping and other crimes.
But even those cases were soon eclipsed by another. The biggest police corruption case in FBI history happened right here in Puerto Rico in 2010, Operation Guard Shack. Hundreds of agents were flown into the island to take down a staggering number of law enforcement officials.
We had Operation Guard Shack, which is very well known by now, where police officers were escorting what they thought was drug dealers making transactions. Either they were participating as sort of bodyguards, or just helping them out transport drugs from one point to another.
We found out one of them was selling like crack cocaine or distributing it. And we asked him through our sources to purchase a certain amount. It was like 1,000 caps or something. And this guy came, uniform, in the police motorcycle, and opened the what they call it, the trunk or whatever, and pulled them out like nothing. And then in the middle of a parking lot in a shopping center. And a part of me is like, I'm kind of freaking out here, to tell you the truth. And he was kind of like, hey, yeah, here you go. This is what you asked me for. And he was fully uniformed.
What does that tell you?
Probably he didn't see any risk. Hey, this is what we do. It's normal. People do it, you know.
Another police evidence officer got caught on tape bringing along her young child while she was selling confiscated weapons on the black market.
So one of the sources we're working with agreed to purchase a couple of weapons. And she shows up and gets in the car with him. And she has her child in her lap. And she's pulling these weapons with this bag. And, you know, we have a camera in the car, of course. So we see the kid watching her passing guns to him, a couple of guns. And it was like normal. Like, again, no shock value. And this is what I do.
In all, 500 FBI employees and 50 SWAT teams were brought to Puerto Rico to make more than 130 arrests. That was 2010. To this day, Operation Guard Shack remains the FBI's largest one-day takedown and the biggest corruption case in its history. Today, the FBI SWAT team is always on standby, and under Rivieri's tenure, a third team was added under the heading of public corruption. Several dozen agents are split into 3 squads, targeting crooked elected officials, police and correctional officers, and judicial corruption. Rivieri says the FBI enjoys a special confidence among the locals and that despite Puerto Rico's reputation and history, there are plenty of honest people doing the right thing.
You know, just because we arrested 10 cops, that doesn't mean the police of Puerto Rico is a problem. They had 10 cops that were a problem. I feel like our mission here might look different if you compare it to the other offices, but this is what we do. We have a little more exposure because people expect a lot of us. And they know that when there's a case or there's a situation or corruption issue, that if the FBI is involved, people have a lot of trust in us here, which is great. It makes our job easier.
By the way, just before Christmas, Puerto Rico's former Education Secretary, Kelleher, who was getting a $250,000 a year salary, was sentenced to 6 months in prison on 2 corruption charges. Ahead on Full Measure, find out what happened in one state that stayed open during the pandemic. About 2 years since the first COVID cases were recognized, there's finally enough space for some hindsight to judge various strategies used to try to shut down the pandemic. Some states like New York imposed strict mask mandates, travel restrictions, shutdowns, and vaccine passport requirements, while other states largely remained open and drew a lot of criticism for it. Lisa Fletcher reports you might be surprised at how things turned out in Oklahoma.
When COVID first arrived in Oklahoma at the beginning of March 2020, the reaction of state and local officials followed a familiar pattern. Big sporting events canceled, non-essential businesses closed, gatherings of more than 10 banned. But while cities and states on the east and west coasts entered what would become long lockdowns, Oklahoma's Republican Governor Kevin Stitt decided early on to take a different path.
I think as a leader, you can't be swayed with public opinion. It's very easy to get swayed by what we're seeing on television and what's happening maybe in New York or California. But that's why I was telling my team the whole time, let's keep focused on Oklahoma.
So in April 2020, just weeks after the shutdown began, and with cases spiking around the country, the governor was back to announce the reopening.
We're here today to explain how and when we will get Oklahoma back open.
You reopened the state of Oklahoma, not without some harsh criticism.
We wanted to protect the health and lives of Oklahomans, but part of that is also protecting the health and lives of our businesses. The economy is not a light switch. You can't just flip this on and off. So I thought it was very important to signal that we're not going to pick winners and losers and say this is an essential business and this is not essential business. Everything is an essential business if it's your business and it's something that you've poured your blood, sweat, and tears and your capital into doing it.
Stitt was accused of putting profits ahead of people, risking the well-being of Oklahomans to keep businesses open. In March 2020, he posted a photo of himself and his family unmasked in a crowded restaurant. On June 1st, he fully reopened the state's economy and remained undeterred the next month when he became the first governor to be diagnosed with COVID.
And got tested yesterday for COVID-19, and the results came back positive.
You've said many times you strove to balance the health of Oklahomans with the Oklahoma economy. But is there a number? I mean, what's the right balance between the number of deaths from the pandemic and the health of the economy?
Obviously, one death is too many. And if I could wave a magic wand and make COVID disappear from my state, I would have done it in the very beginning and would have done anything I could. Unfortunately, this is a virus. This is something that I knew was going to kind of run its course. And that's why our data in our state, we'll put it up against anybody.
Based on figures from the Oklahoma Department of Health and the CDC, the state spent much of 2020 with a case rate just below the national average, while for last year, 2021, it was slightly above the average. But when it comes to the economy, Oklahoma is in strong position, having kept unemployment lower than the national average through most of 2020 and ending the year with money in the bank. How did you get a budget surplus out of 2020?
Because we never shut down. We never shut down. We've been fiscally responsible. I've held the growth of government down. I believe we need more taxpayers, not more taxes in the state of Oklahoma.
There are always hidden costs to everything, and as economists start to peel back the layers on 2020, surely they're going to find things we're not thinking about. What do you think some of the hidden costs are to the pandemic that maybe the average person hasn't thought of at this point or has had to encounter?
Well, I told this to President Trump and also President Biden that the continued bailouts are going to be problematic for our national debt, for inflation. We didn't need any more bailouts. I believe that I represent Oklahomans very well. We believe in more freedoms. We believe that they didn't want the government coming in telling them that you had to stay at home during this pandemic. And so as their governor, I agreed with them, and we weren't going to make them do that like we saw in other states. My kids were in school the whole time. Oklahoma, for the most part, was in school the entire time. Had a couple school districts that weren't. And I believe our kids now are ahead of the kids in California or New York or some of these other states that decided to take a year off.
You've talked about a lot of things that you think worked out well based on the decisions you made, but if you had a measure of success, looking back, what would that measure be?
I would say my success is that I trusted the Oklahoma people and I trusted their personal responsibility. I don't have all the answers. Government doesn't have all the answers. That's why we believe in personal freedoms. And I wanted to be transparent with Oklahomans. I trust Oklahomans to make the right decision. That's what I'm most proud of.
Wasn't the governor one of the first ones to challenge the vaccine requirement for the state guard?
He was. In fact, he was one of the first state leaders to do that. It ended up in court. He lost the first round. That is an ongoing battle. And then recently, Governor Stitt announced he's not going to get a booster shot despite the CDC recommending it.
Now, another story that you've been covering for us has to do with the rising cost of beef and how the American ranchers were saying that they weren't seeing any of those increased profits.
Right. We looked at the plight of Oklahoma beef farmers who, like many around the country, are struggling, even as consumers are facing those skyrocketing meat prices. Farmer groups have accused the 4 big meat processing companies, 2 of which are Brazilian-owned, of having too much control of wholesale and resale prices at the expense of ranchers and consumers. And as one told us when we were in Oklahoma, what are family farmers up against right now?
Extinction, probably.
Who's getting all the money?
Right now, the beef packer. They're totally ripping people off.
In the last few days, the Biden administration announced $1 billion in funding to independent meat processors and farmers. And one of the things they're promising to do is to strengthen that produced in the USA label. Because one of the things the multinational companies have been doing is raising the cattle and slaughtering it abroad, bringing it to the U.S., simply packaging it here, and then slapping the Made in the USA label on it.
Always figuring out an angle. They
Always
are.
a loophole.
All right, well, thanks for the update. Coming up next on Full Measure, a tech exodus that's taking business and talent from California. With no state income tax and abundant sunshine, Florida has become a destination for many people and businesses. Scott Thuman reports a lot of talent and investment are relocating from California's Silicon Valley to the emerging tech hub of Miami.
These are the brand new Miami offices of ShiftPixie, a high-tech company that's created an online platform to connect businesses and today's part-time workforce. In September of 2020, ShiftPixie moved its headquarters here from Irvine, California.
What we saw here was this really arms-open approach to business.
Scott Absher is the CEO.
We saw a very different business climate, very interested in our success and even invested in our success. We didn't have that in Southern California.
A lot of red tape gone?
Yeah, we get things done faster here.
Miami, which has no state income tax, is attracting numerous high-tech businesses that are fleeing states like California, where the taxes, rent, and cost of living are sky high. By one account, over 15,000 companies have left California in just the past 10 years. Now there's talk Miami could become America's new high-tech hub, rivaling California's Silicon Valley, which is home to companies like Google and Facebook.
This is where the money is now.
You've got a lot of guys that manage a lot of money on Wall Street that thought, I don't have to be here. I don't have to have expensive offices in Midtown. I can come down here and I can build a building.
Miami is also drawing a lot of crucial investment money in the form of venture capital, financiers pouring money into startups in exchange for shares of stock. According to one analysis, Miami ended 2020 with the fastest fourth-quarter venture capital growth of any metro area in the country, about $1.9 billion, which is up 685% from Miami's previous quarter. Thanks in large part to an unusual Twitter campaign by Miami Mayor Francis Suarez, who saw California's loss as Florida's opportunity.
We are not New York, we are not Chicago, we are not San Francisco. We are Miami.
After a senior member of venture capital firm Founders Fund tweeted, "What if we move Silicon Valley to Miami?" Suarez responded, "How can I help?" He didn't stop there and continued his social media outreach to convince other tech companies to trade coastlines.
Mayor Suarez reached out to us on Twitter, and he reached out to us at a time where we were considering where we want to open up another office.
Taylor Glassmore is a co-founder at Zumper, one of America's largest platforms in apartment rentals based in San Francisco. Courted online by Miami's mayor, it's now opening a new office here and creating up to 150 jobs.
What kind of financial benefits could it be to you as a company to be here?
As we expand to have a office, like keeping the cost of running a business low. There's also some tax benefits too of being in Florida. And then the talent as well. We're not competing with the Googles and the Facebooks for great talent, which we are in San Francisco.
With all this growth in Miami, could Florida ever really replace California as America's premier high-tech headquarters?
Is it an exaggeration to say this is kind of becoming Silicon Valley?
I think it's early
to.
I think it's early to say that, and the reason I say that is there's another element that needs to be in the mix, and it's the education piece. Part of what makes Silicon Valley so successful, or makes Boston so successful. You have Boston, you have the mix of money management there. You also have education there with MIT, constantly incubating and cultivating the entrepreneurs of the future, the innovators of the future. Same thing in Silicon Valley.
There's still a lot of reasons to want to be in California. There's a lot of venture money that's still there. So it's a great place to raise capital. You still have you have great universities there producing great talent.
Miami is working on the education part of the equation too, with area colleges drawing millions of dollars in donations to develop talent and fuel the city's high-tech hunger.
And it's always been the case. But
Meantime, Shift Pixie just added another floor to its Miami headquarters, a sign the Sunshine State's warm reception is starting to click. For Full Measure, I'm Scott Thuman, Miami, Florida.
After a break, what's ahead next week on Full Measure? Coming up next week on Full Measure, from deadly attacks by Islamic extremists at the Boston Marathon to the Fort Hood, Texas massacre, the FBI has a long string of embarrassing misses on its record.
It starts happening multiple times. It's kind of like, okay, we need to change how we operate because obviously we're getting good information, but we're not being able to decipher how we respond to it, what's good information, what's bad information.
Why do so many advance warnings and clues seem to fall through the cracks, and what should be done to fix it? Next week on Full Measure. And if you want to hear more about our stories, check out our podcast, Full Measure After Hours, on your favorite distributor. Until then, we'll be searching for stories that hold powers accountable. Thanks for watching. I'm Sharyl Attkisson.